Empty. That's what they saw when they looked into me. No hunger for approval, no desperate hand reaching out, no trembling need for a seat at their table. Just nothing. And that nothing terrified them more than any threat I could ever speak. They whispered about danger like it was a weapon I carried. But I didn't carry anything. I didn't need to. Because the absence of need, it cuts deeper than a blade. When you don't chase their validation, when you don't collapse under their silence, when you don't beg for their light, you become the shadow they can't touch. That's when they realize the power wasn't in their hands. It was in mine. All along, I watched them try to provoke me, to bait me, to pull me into their games. Laughter, insults, expectations, little strings they thought could control me, but strings only work on puppets. And I cut mine a long time ago. I sat there, smiling, not moved, not broken. They called me dangerous the moment they understood they had nothing left to take. And that's the joke, isn't it? You only fear what you can't control. And I was the punchline written in silence. No chains, no leash, no bargain. I was the monster they built when they realized I didn't need their stage to perform. I was already the show. So when they called me dangerous, I didn't argue, I didn't defend, I didn't speak. I just grinned. Because they were right, I didn't need them. And that made me untouchable. They thought need was universal, that every soul had a price, every body had a leash, every heart had a weakness. They built their world on that assumption, and they wore their chains like jewelry, thinking everyone else was shackled the same. But when I didn't move, when I didn't ask, when I didn't kneel, the cracks began to spread. First it was confusion. Why won't he react? Then it was doubt. What if we don't matter? And then panic, because the entire stage they'd been dancing on depended on someone watching, someone clapping, someone playing the game. And I wasn't playing. That silence was heavier than any scream. I saw their eyes dart, their smiles flicker, their confidence bleed out like a slow leak in the dark. They were built on attention, on validation, on the fragile applause of the crowd. Take that away, and they collapse. And I took it away without lifting a finger. I didn't need to fight. I just existed, and that was enough to ruin them. They called me cold. They called me cruel. But the truth is simpler. I was free. Free from their bait, free from their promises, free from the illusion that I needed to belong. And freedom, real freedom, is the scariest mask a man can wear, because it shows the rest of them how little they have, how small they really are. So when they whispered dangerous, I smiled. Because they were right, not because I had power over them, but because I didn't care to use it. And that's the one thing they'll never understand. The moment you need nothing, you hold everything. The laughter came first. Sharp, mocking, the kind that drips venom disguised as amusement. They thought they could corner me with noise, bury me under the weight of their voices. Every smirk, every insult, every sideways glance was a blade they believed would cut deep. But I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I didn't give them the pleasure of seeing the wound. I watched them circle, desperate for reaction. That's all it ever was, performance. Their cruelty had no teeth without an audience. Their words, no weight without a response. And I gave them nothing, silence, stillness. The kind of stillness that makes people nervous, that makes them second-guess their own strength. It wasn't me breaking, it was them. One by one, the laughter cracked. The jokes died in their throats. Their eyes flickered with unease because the punchline never landed. I was the joke that refused to end, the shadow that refused to vanish, the silence that refused to be filled. And the more they pushed, the more obvious it became. The only thing fragile in that room was them. I could feel it, the shift, the air thickening, the bravado dissolving. They came to destroy me, but ended up dismantling themselves. That's the irony of power built on control. When the strings don't move the puppeteer starts to panic, and panic spreads like fire. So I stood there, smiling, calm, untouchable. Their world was shaking, not mine, and they knew it, because the one who needs nothing is the one you can never break. It was almost funny watching them unravel. The more they pushed, the less I moved. The more they shouted, the quieter I became. And in that silence, their masks began to slip. You could see the doubt crawl across their faces, the fear hiding behind their bravado. They thought I was the one on trial, but really it was them. One by one, their words started to falter. The confidence that once filled the room drained out like smoke. They realized I wasn't reacting, not because I was weak, but because I didn't care. And that indifference was louder than any scream I could have given. My stillness became a mirror, showing them what they really were. Insecure, fragile, addicted to control. They wanted a victim. Instead, they found a void, and voids don't break, they swallow. My silence devoured their noise. My smile consumed their rage. They couldn't touch me because there was nothing to grab onto. No plea, no anger, no need, just emptiness. And that emptiness was power. I watched their shoulders tense, their eyes dart, their voices crack. The entire room shifted, not because I moved, but because I didn't. They adjusted themselves around me, orbiting a gravity they couldn't escape, and in that moment, I knew they weren't in control anymore. I was. Without lifting a hand, without raising my voice, without needing a single thing, they had already lost. So I stood there, still smiling, because the truth was undeniable. I needed nothing, and that made me untouchable. There's always a breaking point. They expected mine to come with screams, with rage, with the kind of desperation that makes men claw for survival. But it never came, because you can't break someone who wants nothing. And in that stillness, in that silence, something else was born. Not weakness, not surrender, but freedom. I felt it, like chains falling away, like air filling lungs that had never known how to breathe. The moment I stopped needing, I stopped bleeding. Their words slid off me, their judgment evaporated, their power collapsed, and what remained wasn't a victim. It was something far colder, far stronger, something untouchable. They didn't understand it at first. They thought silence was defeat, but silence was transformation. Every second I refused to bend, the void inside me grew sharper, darker, heavier, until it wasn't a void anymore. It was presence, a presence they couldn't ignore, a presence that swallowed the room whole. They wanted me to fight for a seat at their table. Instead, I flipped the table in my mind and walked away without moving an inch. And that's when the fear settled in, because they realized I wasn't trapped with them. They were trapped with me. My lack of need stripped away their illusions. My indifference burned hotter than fire. I became everything they didn't want to face. Proof that power doesn't come from being accepted. It comes from walking away without regret. So here's the truth. They'll keep trying to pull you back into their game. They'll laugh, they'll push, they'll test. But if you want to be untouchable, if you want to rise above their noise, need nothing. And when you do, hit subscribe, not because I need it, but because you do. They stopped laughing, they stopped testing. The room that once felt alive with noise now trembled under silence. My silence. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't move a muscle. And yet the weight of me pressed against every wall, every breath, every soul desperate to escape. That's the thing about true power. It doesn't announce itself. It suffocates. Their eyes darted like animals sensing the predator, but no one could name what they felt. Because monsters don't always snarl. Sometimes they just smile. And my smile, calm, crooked, untouchable, was enough to make them wonder what I knew, what I'd seen, what I might do if I ever decided to care. That uncertainty was a knife sharper than any blade they could swing. I could hear the shift in their voices, lower, slower, uneasy. People who once thought themselves giants, shrinking back into shadows, hoping to disappear from mine. But shadows don't hide you when I'm the one casting them. Every glance they stole at me was a confession. Every step back was surrender. They wanted control, but control had already left the room. And me? I just stood there, enjoying the quiet chaos I'd created without a word. It was almost poetic, how little it takes to dismantle an empire built on noise. All I had to do was nothing, no anger, no begging, no reaction, and that nothing became the storm that devoured everything around me. So I smiled wider, because this was the truth they couldn't face. When you need nothing, you own everything, and there's no weapon sharp enough to cut through that kind of freedom. The silence wasn't just silence anymore. It was infection. It spread across the room like poison in the air, invisible, untouchable, but undeniable. They shifted in their seats, adjusted their voices, tried to pretend they were still in control. But the truth was dripping from every nervous glance, every half-swallowed word. I didn't have to speak. They spoke for me, exposing their fear without even knowing it. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it doesn't even need sound at all. It just exists. And existing is enough to suffocate the weak. That's what I became. Existence sharpened into a blade, a presence that couldn't be ignored, no matter how desperately they wished it away. Every second I remained still, the pressure grew heavier, and they drowned deeper. It was beautiful, watching them twist under their own weight. They once fed on control, but now control was starving them. The silence I carried forced them to face themselves, and they hated what they saw. They hated the reflection that showed them their strength was nothing but noise. And the longer I stayed, the clearer it became. I wasn't the one trapped. They were. I didn't lift a hand. I didn't raise my voice. But I felt the walls closing in on them, not on me. They came here certain of their dominance and left questioning their very existence. That's what happens when you need nothing. They realize they can't take anything from you. And in that realization, their entire foundation crumbles. So I stood taller, not because I had to, but because their fear made me rise without moving. They called me dangerous once. Now they were beginning to understand why. Every room has a center. Most people spend their lives clawing for it, begging for attention, demanding eyes on them. But me, I never asked for it. I never wanted it. And that's exactly why it found me. When you need nothing, the world bends toward you. Gravity doesn't argue, it obeys. I watched it happen, slow but undeniable. Their conversations no longer flowed freely. They circled around me like planets caught in orbit, terrified of the sun that refused to burn but still pulled them closer. Every whisper was shaped by my silence. Every decision weighed against my stillness. I didn't dominate them with force. I dominated them with absence. That's the irony they never understood. The one who screams for power loses it. The one who doesn't care about power becomes it. And so I stood there unmoved while they redefined themselves in my shadow. Leaders turned to cowards, voices cracked mid-sentence, confidence drained like blood from a wound. Not because I attacked them, because I didn't. It wasn't a throne I claimed. Thrones are for the desperate. It was something colder, heavier, presence itself. I had become the axis around which everything spun, not by choice, but by inevitability. They couldn't ignore me anymore because ignoring me only made the silence louder, and the louder it got, the more it consumed them. So I let them squirm, I let them sweat, because this was the real joke. I never showed up to lead them. I only showed up to remind them how powerless they were when faced with someone who needs nothing at all. The walls shook, though no one touched them. The air thickened, though no storm had come. It wasn't thunder that made their hands tremble. It was me. My silence had grown so loud it became a presence, a living shadow stretching across every corner of the room. They could feel it pressing against their skin, crawling under it, whispering in the spaces their courage used to fill. They tried to look away, but every time their eyes darted, they snapped back to me. Like prey caught in the gaze of a predator, they couldn't resist the pull, and I never blinked. That was all it took. No words, no gestures, just an unbroken stare that told them everything they didn't want to hear. You've already lost. I could see their bodies betray them, shoulders hunched, breaths shallow, knuckles pale from holding on to nothing. They thought I was dangerous because of what I might do. But the truth was simpler, sharper. I was dangerous because I didn't have to do anything. My silence wasn't passive, it was absolute. And absolute things don't bend. They break whatever collides with them. One laugh slipped from my mouth, quiet, hollow, almost kind. And that single laugh carried more weight than their loudest roars. It wasn't joy, it wasn't mockery, it was inevitability. They wanted a reaction, and I gave them the one they feared most, the reminder that I didn't need to react at all. The room didn't belong to them anymore. It belonged to the silence, to me, and they knew it. That's why their hands shook. That's why their voices died. They weren't staring at a man, they were staring at the storm they had created, and there was no way out. They stared at me, waiting for something, an explosion, a breakdown, a confession that never came. But I gave them nothing, and in that nothing, they finally understood. The silence wasn't a shield. It wasn't an act, it was the truth. I needed nothing from them. Not their respect, not their fear, not their approval, nothing. And that was what shattered them most, because people can fight anger, they can fight violence, but they can't fight absence. You can't defeat someone who's already beyond your reach. You can't wound someone who doesn't crave your touch. That's why they called me dangerous, because I had escaped the game they were still bleeding to win. I stood unmoved while their world bent under its own weight. Every excuse, every mask, every ounce of false power they carried, gone, stripped away by the reflection of what I had become. I wasn't a monster to them. I wasn't a savior. I was the reminder that they were fragile, and I wasn't. That their lives depended on being seen, while mine thrived in the dark. One final smile cut across my face, thin, sharp, merciless. The kind of smile that doesn't ask for permission, doesn't beg for recognition. The kind that says, "You lost the moment I walked in, and you didn't even notice." And then, nothing. No speech, no gesture, just silence, heavier than any sound they'd ever heard. I left them with it, let it wrap around their throats, let it echo in their minds long after I was gone. Because that's the cruelest truth of all. When you need nothing, you take everything.